Hello, dear friends. Today we are going to read very interesting memoirs of a German soldier. It is remarkable that he describes the everyday life of a German soldier, their equipment, and attitude to the war in quite detail. He is a rather cheerful person, so he feels free to tell jokes remembering those tough days. Now then, let's get started. My name is Hans Melker. I was in a travel club before the war, until about 1938. I used to go hiking trips with this club and repair religious buildings in the forests. Then I joined the Hitler Youth, although I joined it willingly because our group had simply merged with it. My parents were greatly upset by this, as they were people with religious and kind-hearted nature, while the Hitler Youth was known as a paramilitary organization. But it was something that attracted the guys. It was a great association, and many interesting things were happening there. I mean, what kind of guy wouldn't be interested in playing war anyway? We trained to shoot, to use the field walkie-talkies and maps. There were competitions among the different units in military training. Then I joined the RAD, which is the Reich Labor Service. As part of this organization, we were building dams to prevent mudslides and a lot of other things. In October 1942, when I was 18, I was drafted into the Army. The service was compulsory. We all had to be in the Army. The military training in the Army was not so much different from the training we were given in the camps of the Hitler Youth and RAD. We were used to the military way of life by that time. Besides everything else, we were trained in conducting a night battle. We were raised at night. Grenades were thrown around to cause a panic among us. Truly, it was hard to make sense of anything among those flashes and rumblings. Such is the night battle. Everyone gets into confusion. The daytime fighting doesn't seem much different from this. My parents were glad that I was in the Army and not in the Hitler Youth. They cared about the fact that my being in the Union and the Army had existed for ages and had a reputation for high moral standards. My parents used to write me letters almost on a daily basis, and they always wanted to send me something they could use themselves. It must have taken my mother a long time to knit me scarf, gloves, or a cap. It makes me ashamed to say, but I almost never put on anything she sent me. I was usually satisfied with the stuff the Army provided and exchanged my mother's parcels. Of course, I had never mentioned it to her. And I didn't answer their letters very often. I got their letters, sometimes whole bunches of letters. The letters were sad. My parents wrote that they were worried about my life. It was after we were sent to the front, and the reason for not writing. The reason I was not writing wasn't because I had no time for it. Actually, I guess I was just a silly kid. Excluding my training and leaves of absence, I spent all of my time in the Army on the Eastern Front, 1943 and part of 1944. I served in the 1st Company, 169th Infantry Regiment, which was a unit of the 68th Division. A bear was our symbol. We were at war against the Soviets. We called them Ivans, enemies, or Bolsheviks. Some of you have read that the German soldiers were being sent to the Eastern Front as a punishment. This has nothing to do with reality, as most of the German soldiers had been to the Eastern Front at different periods of time, and many of them had never seen anything else. For years, it was our only great military campaign. It is impossible to ever forget Russia. It is a very big country, a land of countryside expanses. The Ivans were a horrible enemy. They killed our wounded men and sometimes took no captives at all. There are many nice Russian people, I know that. There was a Russian with us who drove our Zugwagen. It's a big tractor. He also assisted our cooks. One day our cook was pretty upset because this Russian guy found a wounded Russian soldier close to the kitchen and began to have fun splashing hot water on this guy. The cook was going to shoot our Russian, and when all of us were indignant, the guy was told that he was going to be given a great medal and be sent through the front line to his friends. It usually made a Russian feel awestruck. Eventually, he behaved properly, settled in among us after a long period of time. I have several military awards, including the Iron Cross. I got it while I was a messenger. I had a special pouch to hold the packages. I used to hide the pouch within my uniform so that Ivan could not notice it, or otherwise I could be misidentified as an officer or a messenger. That would make me a good target. So I was on my way. I needed to deliver a message to one of our officers when I spotted the Russians in the destroyed house. I rushed back, reporting it to my commander. So I was sent back with a squad of soldiers and a machine gunner to work it out with the Russians. It required no courage at all. I also had the Infanteriesturmabzeichen, which was a badge that soldiers got for engaging in a certain number of attacks. I also had the Infanteriesturmabzeichen, which was a badge that soldiers got for engaging in a certain number of attacks. I also had the Verwundetenabzeichen for being wounded, which we wore on the left chest pocket. We called it the Blech, tin plaque. Several officers had multiple Blech badges. Actually, for the record, we were actually proud of our badges of honor. I am acquainted with some American ex-soldiers who keep their medals in frames on the walls in their houses. Well, do you see any awards framed in my house? Let's say a paperboy shows up in my door and goes, "How did you get this, Mr. Melker?" I'll answer, "Hey kid, I was the bravest soldier of all the Nazis, haha." I was a Gefreiter. That was one rank up from a private. I'll always remember when I was sent to Germany after a penetrating wound to my lung. I was given a badge for the wound in the hospital, and they made a great deal out of it. They gave me an award in front of the guys from Hitler Youth. As they said, it was a great honor to be wounded in the battles for fatherland. After that, one of the guys approached me and asked me about the site where I had been wounded. I explained that my balls had been torn off. You ought to have seen his face after that. Our shirts were pretty long, and we called them our lice house. We cut off small pieces from the hems of our shirts to be used when cleaning our weapons. We had green wool pants and a tunic. There were 2 small pockets on the tunic on the chest and 2 large pockets on the hips. It was a matter of having to keep the pockets almost empty during the training. However, in Russia, we stuffed into these pockets everything we could get our hands on. We had no knapsacks, so we had to put the necessary stuff wherever we could. We had helmets, and on the inner side of them we wrote our name in big white letters. The reason for this was that in the darkness everyone could quickly find his helmet and would not grab the first available one when the bombardment started. We had both shoes and boots. I sold my shoes to our cobbler. He was running a business in his turn, selling soldiers' shoes to the civilians. He would buy the shoes from us, and in return he would give us a paper check stating that the shoes were under repair. In the German army, a soldier was materially responsible for every small thing that was provided to him. If you were missing something you were supposed to have, you got in trouble. When your socks were worn out, it was best to stitch them up or pack them with other stuff, as it was impossible to throw them away. Even a gas mask was not allowed to be thrown away, because it was regularly inspected, and if it was missing, you were in trouble. There was a special Unteroffizier who inspected whether you had a gas mask, but for me, I never needed any trouble. I used to wear foot wraps, Fußlappen, instead of socks. This is how you wrap them around your foot. First, you put your foot at an angle so that your toe and heel face the corners. Then you wrap it around the toe, then cover this side and the other side. I wore out my socks and never had enough patience to stitch them up. The small kit of thread and needles that my mother sent me, I gave to my best friend. I always bartered the nice home-knitted socks my mother sent me for something. I would exchange it for tobacco, food, magazines, whatever. To this day, I'm sorry about that. My mother was sewing my name on the knitted clothes she sent me. Some of the other soldiers told me that they would like to be cared for so much by their mothers. One pair of socks that was sent to me was in the possession of a soldier from an adjacent company. This fellow had his upper body torn off. On his feet, they found a pair of socks with my name on them. The commanding officer of that company went to our sergeant to find out if I was among the missing. Of course, I was alive and not missing. Usually, I only needed my foot wraps, but things changed as the winter season approached. The foot wraps got worn out more slowly, and all you needed to do was to turn it over each time so that the spot of the heel was in a new place. By the way, we called the foot made from cabbage Fußlappen, so bad it smelled. We wore a kind of small cap on our heads. The cap was supposed to be worn with a slight slope. In 1943, they started providing kepi with a visor. In addition, we had police-like kepi with a small plastic visor. It looked elegant, but we never wore them in the fields. These kepis had a white stripe on the top edge. It was the color of the infantry. The same color were the shoulder marks on the epaulets. According to the color of these stripes, it was possible to determine what corps the soldier belonged to. White for the infantry, red for the artillerymen, black for the engineers. It was possible to determine this by watching the soldier personally. If he was a big guy, strong-muscled, and almost deaf, he was an artilleryman. If he was a nimble kid with moving eye pupils, he was a corpsman. If a fellow acted like a bull, he was a military policeman. If a guy had a bumpy head and smelled of gasoline, he was a tank crewman. If a guy had one ear flattened, he was a liaison. The cool fellows were the treasurers. They never looked like soldiers. Each of us had a soldier's badge. They gave those badges with a lanyard so we could hang them around our necks. but it was a metal item that would get cold on my body. After I had to lean over, it would hang down, and then I would straighten up. Ugh, what a chill it was on my chest. That's why I usually kept it in a soldier's book I carried in my pocket. The lice were a trouble, basically because there were plenty of them in the Russian houses we stayed in. Our orderlies were always pouring their powders wherever and whenever, but it never helped to kill the lice. Most times it was better to go to sleep in the open air and get wet. Getting lice didn't require you to be unwashed. We kept ourselves as clean as we could. One day we were sent to some unit that was inspecting the soldiers for lice. I remember a soldier took our uniform, inspected them, and said, "You are dirty swines. You all got lice because you're disgusting filthies. You have to change your underwear daily, then you won't have lice." Then someone of our men threw his dirty uniform in his face. Our food was being cooked in the field kitchens, which were called goulash gun. We used to wait in a queue and the food would be spread out in walks. We had bread, soup, cabbage, and meat. Yeah, we could also have something from the untouchable supply, Eiserne Portionen, der Esterzug, but only if our officer allowed it. These were canned meats. Occasionally, we found these rations in the equipment of men who had been wounded and sent to the rear. There were some of us who took the food from the Brockbüttel if they found them on the men who had been killed, but I could not permit myself such a thing. Every soldier had a Brockbüttel. It was made of canvas, and it was to be hung on the belt. The pouch also had a canvas shoulder strap, which was used for whatever it was used for, but not for its direct purpose, to carry the pouch with a shoulder strap. It was meant to be used for food, but all sorts of items were carried in this pouch. As I mentioned, we had no knapsacks, so we had to keep stuff wherever we could. Speaking about toilets, if we had time, we took a shovel and dug a pit. If we had no time, we would simply find a place to go and squat. The Russians dropped thin paper leaflets down to us, and we used them for the right purpose. When we were encamped, a stationary wooden latrine was set up. During the winter, when we stayed in houses, we put up a notice that said, "Use the toilet." I think some of the guys weren't really interested in getting out in the cold, so they would do their business right in the house. There were no toilets in the houses, but if someone got caught doing it inside the house, that man was seriously in trouble. We never took any trophies, nothing like that I can recall. The Russians got more trophies than we did. Occasionally, we removed the star-shaped badges from Russian caps, but it was not a big deal. I had a watch, a gift from my teacher, but I lost it in the hospital when I was wounded. The thieves nicked my watch in the hospital. You might have gone to the hospital with full equipment because the frontline orderlies wouldn't take any of your stuff. And as soon as you left the hospital, they would only return a small part of the things you had before. When you asked them, "Where is everything I had?" they would say, "What? You didn't have any of these things when you arrived here. You probably lost it when you were wounded." I also recall that I had a few pictures of killed Russians. I can't remember now how I obtained them, as I had no camera. I have no idea what for I needed them because the bodies were everywhere. But when I received my things at the time of discharge from the hospital, the orderly on duty was really interested in having those pictures. I can't figure out why. Somewhat funny. I gave him these pictures. We were afraid of the Russian artillery and projectiles, but the most I was afraid of was Asian soldiers with bayonets. I had such a childhood fear. I visualized this ominous-looking Asian man who was about to stab me with a bayonet. That was something that terrified me. I often think about my parents in the war. My parents were such good people. They were hit by a bomb and died. They were sitting in a shelter when a bomb struck them and the ceiling fell down. My mother stayed in the hospital for almost a month, and after all, passed away. But our house was still there at the end of the war. It was located in a suburb of Berlin called Babelsberg. My company commander told me that my parents were gone, and I suddenly found myself feeling very lonely. I never really appreciated them while they were alive. I don't believe Americans have any idea how much we have suffered. An American would say those Nazis had what they deserved. Yes, there were some cruelties committed by Germany, but the only crime of my parents was that they didn't speak up against their government. What you can often read about Americans is that people are being murdered in front of their eyes and they stand silently by and watch. It is something I am curious about. Will those people who believe that Germany has been punished agree that the police will come and execute not only the murderers, but also those who stood by and watched? Not really. They will make such reasons as, "We were scared," or "It was nothing to do with us," or "The person who was shot was involved in the drug business or had a friendship with the wrong person." It's hypocrisy, And in order to distract people's eyes from the fact that bombing civilians was a crime, they made the air crews of the bombers out to be heroes. How can these guys be fighting for something wrong? That's all for today. I think it was a very interesting story. It gave us an understanding of the life of a German soldier and the battles he fought in. He also made his opinion clear, which also happens quite rarely. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and support the channel by subscribing. Goodbye to everyone. See you later.